Welcome to Inside Integration. My name is Chris, and today is a little bit different of an episode. I am here in a hotel room, and since I'm traveling all week, and Jason's traveling all week, it's going to be a little bit different. And today, it's a little bit personal. Honestly, the story I'm going to tell today is something that I've been kind of carrying for about 20 years or so, and feel like maybe it's time to get it off my chest. This is the story of one of the biggest and most high profile projects that I had ever done in my career up to that point. And again, this is going back 20 years. I mean, I've done larger since, but at the time, this was a monolith in front of me and my team. And it was a Midtown Manhattan penthouse, and really just should have been a career highlight. Really ambitious design. Really just awesome, things that we had never seen before, and things that we were done. And it's turned into one of the most frustrating experiences of my career, not because I was in over my head. I wasn't. I didn't feel like I was, but because the team who were supposed to be leading the project and making sure things were done, and collectively us all as a whole, we were in way out of our depth. And we had some management and some folks on the team who were kind of bluffing their way through and putting out fires instead of managing them. And learned a lot from this project, and kind of shaped me in the 20 years since. It's a lot like when you wake up in the morning, if you eat the frog, then nothing worse is going to happen to you for the rest of the day. This is kind of that moment in my career. I don't think I've been up against the wall as much as on this project. So let's set the scene. It's a full blown massive project. It's a full Crestron system, Lutron lighting control, two gigantic 103-inch Panasonic plasma TVs. And one of those TVs needed to be mounted on a lift that was installed in a ceiling above a dining room so that it would fold down and be viewable from the living room. And 20 years ago, as you might know, 103-inch plasma TV was a very heavy, very power hungry, very rare thing. This thing was the third unit. The two that were on this project were the second and third units that had come to America. The first being installed at NBC's studios. So again, if you were paying attention 20 years ago, you might remember, this specific number one TV being on the stage at like the Today Show or whatever it is. Well, we got number two and number three to install in an apartment, basically. And this thing, it came in a gigantic shipping crate, obviously, massive, for the TV. But even worse than that was the mechanism for the lift was again shipped in a even more massive crate. And we had to come in and basically, it was the largest lift that this manufacturer had ever built. So there was all kinds of fact finding and all sorts of figuring things out, and specs weren't exact because the specs on the TV weren't exact because nobody had really seen one of these things in person. um Probably a translation between engineers at Panasonic and the folks who were building the lift and that kind of thing. Um but came in a giant crate. It took up most of the loading bay in this building. So right out of the gate, we were hamstrung. um Getting that crate up into the penthouse, and again, we had the folks who were planning things at this point, were a little bit in over their heads, but this thing required Otis to come in, and Otis, the elevator company, to come in, disassemble the elevator, and strip it down to basically just a frame in a 80-story shaft. Put the thing in there, and a couple of us got the pleasure of riding up the completely pitch dark shaft with this thing in the middle of the night because we couldn't take apart the freight elevator during normal business hours. So, we would have to go to site and put this thing in, and you know, essentially once we got this thing all the way up there, it needed to be through bolted from the ceiling of the penthouse through the concrete concrete ceiling into the mechanical space above, which is where there's radio transmitters, there's air handlers, there's all kinds of stuff. So we need the building engineer to sign off on that. We needed the project engineer to sign off. There were all these approvals that we had to go through all on the way, and all of this stuff was kind of being figured out like at the last possible second. And as a technician, man, there is no worse feeling in the world than showing up and what do you mean we can't do this? That we're 70 miles from home. Like, what are we supposed to do today? And that kind of thing. So yeah, really just just as bad as you could imagine without proper management. And as the project moved forward, it became painfully obvious that the people in charge, management, sales, didn't really have a handle on the situation. Um, they projected confidence. They acted like everything was under control, but it was really becoming clear that you know the folks who were supposed to be handling this stuff were out of their depth, way out of their depth, and they just hadn't planned properly for a project of this magnitude in New York City, which was pretty far from our base of operations, and just weren't prepared for the realities of a high profile job like this. Um, I was brought on in this particular firm. I was brought on pretty late in the game, and I kind of got dragged into this thing because I had some experience and I had some of the technical skills, to kind of MacGyver my way through, whatever would come up. And as you can imagine, those skills were useful to some of the project team. And we had other technicians who I worked with who were skilled in a lot of the same ways. But this kind of project, you should not be improvising the amount that we did. There was just no real planning, and a lot of bluffing, and we were just reacting to problems as they came up, which obviously not ideal. One of the most frustrating parts of this project was that we didn't even have all the equipment that we needed. So because this was like a last second, a lot of these phases were last second, like panicked rush jobs. We would be in a warehouse in the morning, or before we were supposed to go up there for a week or whatever it was. And hey, do we have this? No, we don't have that. Did we even order that? Well, let's go check. Let's go talk to this person. So a lot of that kind of went into this. And again, just to kind of pile that issue on top of 6 or 7 other ones that we were dealing with, just not ideal. A lot of pretty rough days. Um, there was also, again, coming up against the wall of time. um we got so far behind on this project that we had to start working in the building after hours. And if you're familiar with how it works in Manhattan, you have a set, there's other residents in the building, everybody's very close together, so you have a very set amount of hours that you can work on a certain day. So what we would have to do in order to keep making progress on this job, because we were running out of time and a client was coming into town and we needed to hit a milestone, we, we would you know about 4:30, the superintendent of building would kind of come around and make sure that all the sites that were under construction were shut down. So we would essentially hide in the apartment, give it a little bit of time, maybe we eat dinner or whatever, and then we'd start working again. We had to make sure that we couldn't do any loud work whatsoever. But essentially, we were hiding out in this building, and there were nights that we would put in a full day, you know, do our little hiding routine, and we would keep on working, and we'd be walking out the door at 5 a.m. or in the middle of the night or whatever it was, just to kind of keep making progress. One specific one that kind of rattles around in my head was this series of all-nighters that we had, where we were there with the Crestron programmer, and because the powers that be didn't have the timeline set properly, the Crestron programmer didn't have the programming done to the point that we needed him to do as we were coming along, through no fault of his own. But now we've got two technicians that are on a site that are plugging things in furiously and trying to make things work, while a Crestron programmer is sitting at the dining room table on a bucket in this, you know, progressively more finished apartment, trying to write code and load a program and test it, load a program and test it, load a program and test it. We had a couple of nights that that's all it was. And it would be, hey, I loaded this thing in and okay, go around the apartment, test all this stuff out, make sure that the Lutron integration is working right. Oh, no, we found this thing. Okay, back to square one. And we would just go over and over and over. And there is, you know, if you've ever been a field technician, lead technician, project manager, or whatever, and you're waiting on a Crestron programmer to, to make some changes so that you could load it, there's nothing more frustrating in the world. And again, Crestron programmers very skilled. They're great. They're awesome. They're not working in their ideal environment on a job site trying to get it done at the last second. You're not dealing with it, so just absolute chaos and complete friction the entire time. um at one point we were we were trying to get stuff anywhere that we could, and we were fortunate enough to be in New York City. It's pretty close to where Crestron's headquarters was, so there were definitely times when we sent out a guy, sent him out of the city, drive over to Rockley, go pick up something from Crestron, get it in because somebody didn't have the forethought to order this thing 4 months ago and build it off site. Um, there were also there were also a couple times where we were begging and borrowing and stealing from our competition that was nearby. Anybody who was nearby, hey, is there any chance that you have an XYZ? Do you have an endpoint for Crestron composite video that we can get from you? Yeah, okay. Well, my guy is going to run up to Westchester and go pick it up, and he's going to come right back. And it was constantly that. And like you would take a couple steps forward, and then you'd get this gut punch of not having the right gear because it didn't get ordered, or because the guy who designed the system didn't realize that you needed widget A to make system B work. And it was it was impressive. We had a few times where we had the admins in our office driving 75 miles from headquarters up into the city in the middle of the night to deliver gear from a guy who was posing as a building resident so he could go down to the street, get the thing out of the car, take the elevator back up, bring it to us so that we can keep installing it, just to keep the project moving forward. And it always felt like we were on the absolute knife edge of disaster, because we were. It was that close. This is the ultimate. Everybody always wonders, well, what happens if I don't do this, or get this PO done in time, or get this check from the client in time, and order the gear in time, and whatever. This is what happens. It all ends up, that bill comes due at the end, and it is just an absolute nightmare for the guys on site who are there doing it. So besides just the constant feeling that we were getting crushed and behind the eight ball, and constantly trying to just improvise and make things work, one one specific part of this project that I can laugh about now, but probably took a few years off my life at the time, was this disaster with draperies. And as a result of not coordinating with interior designers and the folks providing the draperies, we ended up um, with these 15-foot high draperies, floor to ceiling windows, 80 stories up in an apartment building, just a wall of glass. And the draperies were low voltage, but the only thing that was run to the location is high voltage wiring. And this is regular 120 volt. And we were panicking. We were absolutely, how are we going to do this? We need to get these things in so they could get their certificate of occupancy, everything else. And here we are. This is a problem that should have been solved months ago. Somebody should have noticed that the wire that was coming out of the ceiling was was a Romex wire, a BX wire, or whatever it was. High voltage, and the drapes that were being provided by whoever provided them were low voltage. So what did we do? We sent one of our helpers to essentially every Radio Shack in Manhattan. Remember when Radio Shacks existed? And how many times has Radio Shack saved your butt on a project? Well, for us, we sent a technician to every single Radio Shack that we could find within probably 20 blocks north, south, east, and west of where we were in Midtown. And they bought out every single Ice Cube relay and relay base that they could find, and we were able to just MacGyver this thing. So like literally 15 feet up on a ladder, leaning on a window, looking 80 stories down to wire in a drapery motor, to get that high voltage to relay to, to be able to articulate for low voltage. And you know, this was a disaster. So you had the guy go out and he would get a bunch of them, and we would have him on his way back. Okay, drop him off so that we could keep moving around. Um, and absolutely due to a lack of planning, the amount of time that we just ate we just ate our hats on all of that time and had to come up with a solution, and a janky solution at that. Ice cube relays in you know in a ceiling space in Manhattan, controlling tens of thousands of dollars of draperies because somebody couldn't coordinate that particular step. Um, you know, Great, we solved the problem, but we absolutely took years off of our lives doing it. We probably look like complete imbeciles to anybody who was watching, definitely to ourselves. And it could have been solved with a phone call. That's all it would have taken. So what really felt frustrating wasn't the technical challenges, right? That was fine. It was the fact that we were constantly reacting to problems that could have been avoided with proper planning. I didn't feel like I was in over my head. My team on site didn't feel like we were in over our heads. We could handle the technical side. Like that wasn't an issue. But it was exhausting to watch leadership like just kind of bluffing their way through and pretending that everything was under control and telling the client's agent that things were, yeah, we're making progress. This is great. And we were just reacting. We were just going from one fire, putting it out, going to the next fire, putting it out. Okay, here's the next fire, but with more pizzazz. Okay, we'll put that one out. Here's the next thing. And it was just, it really felt like, you know, myself and our guys on site, that we were the ones that were holding things together. Even though we weren't project management, we weren't the sales team who was promising all these things. The people who were supposed to be leading weren't stepping up and really just kind of leaving it to the rest of us to figure it all out. And it was frustrating because we had the skills to get it done. We absolutely could have gotten it done, but we weren't being supported by proper leadership. Now, looking back, this project taught me some really, really hard lessons about leadership and preparation and management. But the biggest takeaway is that bluffing doesn't work. Like eventually that bill comes due. You can't just project confidence along the whole project length and hope that those problems are going to go away. That bill comes due at the end, and usually with your guys who are on site really trying to make it done at the very end. And you need you need the skills and you need the people in place to manage projects like this. You need to be able to take a realistic look at a project and say, okay, these are the spots where things are going to go down. This is where the potential problems are. This is how this thing could go sideways. Let's plan for it and let's get around it, and let's make sure that my guys on site at the very end, who are there because they are gifted at dealing with clients, or they are really really fast at setting up systems, they work really really neat, and they make everything look just absolutely amazing that the client is going to see. Yeah, let them focus on that stuff. Put the people in place at the beginning of the project and throughout the project who can really just handle all the interactions, all the sub trades, all of these guys, and make sure that it's somebody who's capable of doing this at a scale for the project that you are taking on, right? It's really great. Sometimes your your eyes are bigger than your stomach, especially if you're in sales, right? Like you're not going to turn away a gigantic project. You're just not wired that way. But you need to make sure that you've got the team that can handle that kind of thing. And it's very important to know how these things work. So, as you might have been able to figure out, we did not do an honest project because of how it was planned, how it was managed, because it had to be slapped together at pretty close to the last second to accommodate a client schedule that got moved up, and we just were not prepared for that. Um, We didn't pre-build the racks. You might have been able to figure out that out by the fact that we were scrambling at the last second in this story. Um, we didn't test the systems off site. We had to figure out everything on site with the clock ticking. We had to deliver everything separately, including rack shelves, the racks themselves, any gear that was going in, rack mount kits for that gear, all these things. And it all came back to bite us because, again, there wasn't proper planning. And when you pre-build and test systems in your shop in your controlled environment, you are controlling the environment. It takes one variable out of your project where we were here in a very small equipment closet in Manhattan, right? Obviously, everything is very tight there, and we were identifying wires. The rack is literally sitting there next to where all the wires are coming out of the wall, and we're still ringing stuff out. We didn't, it didn't get tested ahead of time. There was no stage for that. Nobody, no labor was allocated to making sure that the site was ready. And in the same way, no labor was assigned to building the rack off site. It could have just been, hey, build this thing up, wrap it in moving blankets, send the whole rack up to the job site, take all these pre-labeled wires that are terminated and tested, plug it in and get going. That could have been, a 1 day or 2 day rack drop. Instead, it was weeks of testing and building and trying to get middle Atlantic rack faces. Remember those when the things were laser cut for whatever piece of gear you were putting in there? Trying to get those rush ordered and then driving over to Fairfield, New Jersey to go pick them up and bring them back to the job site. Um, it's you can catch problems early. You can make sure that the gear is going to work. You can really make your on-site guys just you can make their days a lot easier by pre-planning, building this stuff in-house. I mean, we were doing documentation on site as we were going. So guys in there, he's building a rack and he's writing down on a box top like what stuff is plugged in. And we're lucky we got that much because that was our as built. And that is putting the time into pre-planning things like ringing out wires, things like properly marking the wires when you run them, building these things in site, investing in a rack building area in your shop that you can dedicate a guy a couple afternoons to build something and then just send it out as a finished product. Huge, huge, huge difference. And when you pre-build and test, you catch things early. So here's a confession. This project still haunts me. And not because the technical problems were too much, but because it was managed so poorly and literally everything that preventably could have been fixed before we were on site just didn't happen. And leadership was bluffing, planning was non-existent, and the project felt like it was held together by duct tape and baling wire. And this client who probably doesn't even know that all these things went wrong got a product that was inferior to what they could have gotten had they had a firm that planned things out, executed it right, knew what they were, really doing and managing things along the way. It didn't have to be this way. And it's something I think about almost every single day, especially when I talk to a lot of dealers out there and kind of try and impart on them like, don't fly by the seat of your pants. It doesn't matter how small you are, come up with a plan, come up with some sort of engineering, whether it's a line drawing or just an Excel spreadsheet with a source and destination map and whatever it is. Any little bit that you can do to make your life easier at the end of the project is going to make your life easier at the end of the project. It's not a difficult concept. The biggest lesson that I took from this was the importance of pre-building and testing the systems offsite. When you do that, you control things, you can catch problems early, and you can troubleshoot without the client hanging over your shoulder or without, other trades buzzing around you the entire time. Nothing is going to be a surprise by the time you reach the job site because you've already anticipated it. And if you're real smart and you have your guy who's building the racks follow through into the project, then that is somebody who is prepared to just hit the ground and run right through the end of this project. Another important takeaway is knowing your limits. And it's important to understand the limitations of your firm, right? Like you might be best, the absolute best salesperson. You could sell a project to a client. It's $1 million AV project. Your sales skills are unimpeachable and you're amazing at it. But if you don't have the team to back that up, including people to plan it, people to procure gear, people to execute things, it's going to be a nightmare for everybody involved. And that that skill of knowing what jobs to pass up, maybe because you're not at that level yet, or maybe because your company is in transition and you're trying to get a guy up to speed and he's probably not going to be there by the time that the project is coming to its end. He won't be at that skill level. You need to be able to identify that, and you need to be able to work with your team. If you're a salesperson as part of a team, you need to have a really good handle on that, because man, there is nothing that can sink you faster than just absolutely falling face first on a high profile project. It's also important to note that good leadership is way more than just projecting confidence. The leadership on this project, and again, going back 20 years, and a lot of lessons were learned here. A lot of lessons were learned by me here. Um, but good leadership is more than just projecting confidence. It means having a real plan, supporting your team, and being prepared for the unexpected, and eliminating the things that you can identify as left turns that are coming. Um, Leadership needs to communicate clearly with both the sales and the technical team, right? So your project management falls in between your salespeople and your field people. And that person needs to have an understanding of what's coming down the pipe and where it's heading to, and be able to understand. And if that leadership is not aligned, if they're just bluffing and kind of hoping that everything works out so that we get that deposit or whatever it is, it creates a ripple effect, and it can sink your team and it can sink your entire company. Super important. So thanks for sticking with me through this story. Again, this is something that's kind of been on my mind for a long time, as long as we've been doing these podcasts. I think this is episode 42. I'm not sure, but this seemed like a pretty good one to kind of get off my chest. If you've had an experience like this, please let us know in the comments. Keep it anonymous, but absolutely reach out. Tell me I'm not crazy. Tell me I'm not the only one who's ever dealt with anything like this. I have a feeling I'm not, but that's it. Thanks for joining me.